So, and once a newsroom applies to join civil, and let's just say the community has no issue with them when they apply, nobody takes any action when they apply, nobody challenges them. Great. They become part of what's called a token curated registry, or a TCR. And that's, you can kind of think of that as a whitelist of publishers that are okay to be on our platform. And if they violate the Constitution, if they're challenged, if there's something that is just egregious enough that they should no longer be on the platform, then they can be deplatformed. So this is the sort of seriousness that we want to instill in the journalists that are participating in this. Now, if this all starts to go in, let's call it a Brexit direction with the voting, or people feel like it's a bit off, you can appeal the decision. And then if that still feels like it's off, or even if there's a reason for someone to step in because the community just maybe didn't get it right, this is where we have our Civil Journalism Council, the Civil Council, which is part of our nonprofit called the Civil Foundation. And a few weeks ago, about a month ago, we announced that Vivian Schiller is the CEO of that foundation. So she's the former CEO of NPR. I spent a lot of time at the New York Times, at CNN, and she's already seating her council who will help to adjudicate these disputes and challenges. And they will have to publish their findings in a very transparent way, and maybe even start to set precedent over time to try to establish the behavior on the platform. And I can kind of get into more of how all that works. But that's the idea of the civil registry. Now, this is a part of the blockchain cryptoeconomic world. It's a, I wouldn't say it's a growing part of sort of how this all works. The idea of, there are some efforts around advertisers in this way. So thinking about, could you have a whitelist of advertisers that are adhering to some set of standards or ethics? And that allows them to have access to consumers in ways that are acceptable. We can all debate whether that feels good or not, but that's one area that's being looked into. And the civil constitution, which I'll pull up in a bit and you can see what it looks like currently, is something that did start with us, but it's been reviewed by more than 50 journalists, academics, First Amendment lawyers. We have, this is where Vivian is helping to ratify this constitution. So over the roughly first year, 365 days after we launch, the council, along with the community, will have an opportunity to amend the Constitution, change it, whatever they feel like is missing. And in the future, they can also continue to do that. This isn't sort of set in stone, much like the Constitution that we know here. Very similar sort of a model. And I think that, as we also know, the Constitution doesn't solve everything, right? And I think that the thing to remember is that we're not trying to solve journalism. I would argue that journalism is not ever going to be solved, much like democracy will never be solved. It could be better, it could be sustainable. It's a business, right? So what are the ways in which that we as a community can help to make that possible? And that's where we see civil fitting in. So I mentioned the Civil Council, and that they have this opportunity to weigh in as, let's call it the voices of authority, or the experts, right? And I know some of the folks that Vivian is seating in the council, and she has autonomy over all of those people. We're not telling her who to seat, but they're really, I think they're really great folks, and I'm excited about their participation in this. They will also not be doing this for the rest of their life. These are term positions. They'll be cycled through. We're trying to be global. It's a global platform. So thinking about ways that we can make this feel international, with participation from people in other countries. And then you see at the bottom that the council can also be overturned by the community in a supermajority vote. So they can be held accountable in these checks and balances as well. So I'll kind of just skip through some of this, and then I want to show you some real world examples. For the people who are a little bit more into crypto and blockchain, we're using an ERC20 token. So this is built on Ethereum, which is the second largest blockchain, I think, next to Bitcoin, right? So Ethereum, and the advantage with Ethereum is that unlike Bitcoin, and if people want to talk about the differences between Bitcoin and Ethereum and others, I'm happy to get into it. But the sort of primary way to think about why it's different is that Bitcoin is very specifically about one thing. It's about a store of value, a trustless system that allows an exchange of transactions and a store of value. That's basically it. People have realized its limitations for paying for things, the time it takes, all of this stuff, right? Ethereum is much more about building on top of that. So what are the ways in which you can tap into that trustless system, or the proof of stake, or proof of existence, or proof of work. These are the kinds of terms that happen in a decentralized system, where there are people participating in sort of the veracity of things that are going through these networks. Just a reminder though, garbage in, garbage out, right? The blockchain is not a magic basket of perfect and true information. So that's the journalists and the newsrooms that are publishing on our platform. Yes, they're pushing their content. They will have the option to push the content to the blockchain, but they're also pushing it to the web. And they will have to think about, where does each one live? This is really up to them. Do they want to push everything to blockchain? That creates a permanent log that people can go and see. Okay, well, I guess that's up to you, really. I mean, I know there are some journalists who get nervous about this sort of thing, because what if something is wrong? What if they have to change something? I'm going to say, as somebody who worked on the digital side of newsrooms for many years, there are corrections that sometimes get made and maybe aren't called out in as public a way as we all might like, right? And that's a reality that I think we all probably know, and how that gets told to the audience, we changed this thing, or this was corrected, or how you know that anything changed, right? But through blockchain, you can timestamp the content. There's no way of trying to fake when it was updated. So if you really want to know and go back and see that kind of, the sort of breadcrumb trail, you can do that. I won't get so much into this, because these are other use cases of our token and cryptoeconomics, but there are ways that blockchain helps around licensing and syndication. So you can kind of think of like a fingerprint being attached to a digital asset, and then you wrap that in what's called a smart contract, and that basically sets terms. If this photo is used in this story for a week, the cost is X, and it gets distributed to this person and to this person. If this photo goes somewhere else, then the compensation goes back to this person and this person and this person and this percentage and this percentage and this percentage. And that's where this cascading compensation starts to come in. And I think we can think of a lot of ways where this can help with content creators. And so here, if you think about citizens who are very early into where we are, the value to them is here, and as time goes on, the value to them is going to go up as we start to pull more types of contributors, more audiences into this. So there's a network effect that's starting to happen with all of this. And I mentioned some of the rewards. So there are ways that newsrooms can think about incentivizing people to become a member, or to join their newsroom. This is all audience engagement. And by the way, to be clear, and I should have said this from the beginning, we are not trying to do all this ourselves. We are a 25-person company, but we can only do so much. And this is where we're trying to work with the entire ecosystem. We're not trying to put anybody out of business. Quite the opposite, actually. So we're trying to work with developers, or newsrooms, associations, lots of ways to think about how to do this. So we're talking to, folks like the Coral Project, the News Revenue Hub, to journalism schools, right? There's all of this knowledge that we're trying to help unlock and share it with the people who are going to need it in order to achieve sustainability. This is a diagram that I'm just going to move on from, because I want to get to some of the stuff that is happening now. So last year, we received $5 million in funding from Consensus, which is the venture studio attached to Ethereum. And we carved out some of that money to grant to applicants to become part of our first fleet of newsrooms. So this was a big leap of faith for journalists who, this is back, right around the time that I was starting, and it was very early days, but some journalists came to us and said, all right, we'll start a newsroom with you, and we'll kind of figure this out together. And we gave them some grant money, cash, to pay their journalists, and then we allocated them some civil tokens. And that helped to set the value of the civil token, because it's sort of the risk tolerance that each of the journalists had in accepting a difference between cash and tokens helped us understand what is the value of the civil token, because back then it had zero value. So we started to work with journalists as they were coming to our platform and committing to us, and starting to understand just people's risk tolerance. this is like in their head, they're like, okay, I'll accept X amount to pay my salary for a few months or some number of months. What am I comfortable with to make up the difference with civil tokens? And everybody's different, right? So we just started to understand people's comfort level with this. So anyway, we ended up with 13 First Fleet newsrooms, okay? And we asked that they cover local, policy, investigative, and international reporting, because we felt like those were the most threatened areas of journalism based on the current business models. That was really the only criteria. Now, this is the one and only time that we are setting ourselves up as a centralized entity, because somebody had to decide, are these journalists legit and are they even capable of getting a business up and running? So that's where we worked with our partners at Old Town Media, led by Tom McGovern, who founded Capital New York, and a long time at Politico, and his team helped us to vet these newsrooms. Now that in the future is what the community will do, to be clear. But for now, somebody had to supply and demand as a platform. We're trying to create the supply, right?